When US President Barack Obama was recently asked if he was satisfied with all the information that Russia had provided when Russia's security services, the FSB, had first become concerned about Tsarnaev 2 years ago, President Obama replied, "Old habits die hard." He was referring to that historic lack of trust that still exists between Russian and American investigative and intelligence agencies. And the experts that we've been talking to here, these are people who know the FSB, the Russian security services, all were former members of the FSB, say the Boston case shows both sides, the Russians and the Americans, are still very much suffering from that Cold War hangover. The context in this case is that we know that the FSB was first concerned about Tamerlan Tsarnaev because they feared he had become radicalized back in 2011, and they asked the Americans, the FBI, to investigate. The FBI says it did, found no evidence that he posed a threat, went back to the Russians and asked for more information, and never heard anything again. As a result of this, there are still some very specific questions which the FSB is not commenting on, which isn't unusual because it is this highly secretive organization that never offers any sort of public comment or explanation as to its actions or the decisions that it makes. But what we don't know is what the Russians knew, how they got that information, and just how much of it they did end up sharing with the United States as they investigated Tamerlan Tsarnaev. And all the experts we've been talking to, they agree that regardless of what the FSB knew at the time, it was not warning the United States as a favor to the United States in order to help the FBI or the authorities there. Instead, they widely believe that the FSB was using the FBI to try and get some more information on Tsarnaev because they suspected probably that he was becoming, or that he posed some sort of potential threat to Russian security. Atika.
So what is the relationship going to be like going forward? Does this put a further strain on things, or are we going to see, in fact, a lot more cooperation?
Well, over the last 18 months or so, Russia-US relations have hit a very deep freeze. They have been particularly poor, particularly on the surface, particularly at the political level. But in the wake of the Boston attacks, authorities on both sides have been stressing how closely they have been working together. We know that Presidents Obama and Putin have spoken to each other on a number of occasions, and they have come away from those phone calls promising to work very closely on this case and on the threat of terrorism more generally. But despite that, both sides are not commenting on the degree of cooperation that existed before this, the degree of cooperation that could have possibly impacted the ability to determine whether or not Tsarnaev posed any sort of threat long before the Boston bombing took place. At the moment, they're not dwelling on that, at least not publicly.